I think that Sermon 190 is the longest of Nahjul Balaghah. Honor and dignity are exclusive attributes of God. God is the one who chooses what is lawful and unlawful for the creations. The light beings are part of our test. The following 4 verses were said. Elayam il-waqtil ma'lum qala fabizatika la'uwiyannahum ajma'in illa ibadaka minhum muqlasin qala falhaqu walhaqaqu. And us humans are clay beings. And we are completed by a spirit belonging to God. And it was for some beings to prostrate before us. Nowadays we don't bow or prostrate because that would be confused with treating something as a divinity. And these beings fell prostrate to the one who had a soul put into it from God. And Iblis was not of those who prostrated. And so there's some confusion that arises with some of this language for some people, but it's not saying that it's a part of God, as in a part is taken from God. It's that God is the origin of this soul. And the reason why Iblis and some of these fire beings didn't prostrate was because they had a sense of vanity. And the reaction was to make them low in a way, because they were called out and sort of forever known. People say, well, they had a respite and they've maintained some ability and all that, but, you know, they were limited. You know, like the jinn can't become ghouls. They don't actually physically hurt people. They don't make you make the wrong decision and all that. They're not given that ability. So, if we do this same thing, it keeps us from paradise. So we got to be very weary of that. And like a disease, the infection isn't all at once. Oh, what's that verse about charging with the footmen and all that stuff, infect them with their boys? But this part of the sermon is directly an interpretation of that. People say the following verse refers to music, but it's broader than that. Because obviously the various companies and The Voice and all that. But there is a Jewish legend that says, you know, Ha-Satan, or is it Ha-Shatan in that verse, like in Torah? But anyways, the devil comes to God and says, he says, well, something about the official rituals in the scripture and, you know, how will I be worshipped? And basically the musical instruments is how he's going to be worshipped. And did I do that program, or did I just write a paper about music as far as the musical instruments? But anyways, وَاسْتَبْزِمَنِسْتَطَعْتَ بِصَوْتِكَ وَأَجْلِبْ عَلَيْهِمْ بِقِيلِكَ وَرَجِلِكَ وَشَارِكْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَوْلَادِ وَعِدْهُمْ وَمَا يَعِدُهُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ إِلَّا غُرُورًا. The following verse that was quoted addresses a sort of issue that was addressed in other ways in other verses. I'm specifically thinking about how someone was trying to correct me in terms of Surah 18 and how some disbelievers divided into sects after somebody died and built a monument. And it's like, since when is the listing of what people did after they stopped directly learning from the sign and disputing and dividing into sects? You know, how are those people the example of what to do, right? And so Satan said he was going to make the way to misguidance seem pleasing. And you find out that a lot of people's experience isn't quite so when they're in it. But, you know, there was a moment or whatever, and they don't get that moment with anything else. Or, well, because they haven't had that moment lawfully or whatever the thing is. But, you know, Satan was blaming God for allowing him to make that decision. But this was a guess at the unknown. Oh, well, that's how it ties into Surah 18. You know, because after the people of the cave died, people began to dispute about what their number was, as if the number of such things is what matters. And those who want full control over the spiritual path, they are the ones who built up the intolerance. And there are various mischiefs that rose up. They just didn't want it for themselves. That, oh, well, I'm going to disobey for myself. No, they try to put it on others. Like in my country, people's illusion and delusion is starting to be forced upon the people. And it is one thing to excuse the mentally ill, if that's what we're doing. It's another thing to act like we have to support all their fantasies. Like, you know, I have this bookmark somewhere that I picked up, and this bookmark says that, you know, somebody has Alzheimer's and they're saying stuff that's not true. You just, no, you don't, you want to encourage them to have what good in life that they still have left. Not, you know, now, you don't necessarily remind them every time your spouse died or your child died and all that other stuff. If they don't remember anymore, if they're going back to that time where that wasn't the case, okay. You can leave that alone or something, but don't, you know, it's like, no, that was a movie you watched. And in terms of pride and various other wrongdoings, we should take the lesson of what happened to previous nations. I myself have looked at some of these things that people have done and taken a lesson myself. I remember this woman in California that was a neighbor, and I'm like, I can never do drugs like this. I mean, I guess I was prescribed drugs like that, and it was put in a different context or something, but certainly not recreationally, and once I learned that that's what they were doing to me and that it was wrong, I kind of stepped away from doing all those drugs the doctors wanted me to do. Because, you know, some of them will tell you to, you know, they don't even look at your blood work and stuff to see if you actually have these imbalances. They just, we got a guinea pig, let's give them whatever we think we can prescribe them, and prescribe them this because we prescribe them that, and it's an endless vicious cycle if you allow it to be the case. And what, people die on average younger because of the result of some of the damage from using those things, so you don't want to use them for decades and all that. So there are other examples of how I saw what some stuff did to people. Like, sometimes you see that the victimizers, it seems to hurt them more than the victimized, no matter how severe it is. And I don't mean extrajudicial punishments. I mean, you know, what it does to themselves, but not that you don't lead them towards the actual punishment for their crimes. But two verses that were also said in the sermon: Eya sabunanamatu medum behemimalen wabanin nusareulahum fil kairate balayashurun. Of course, one of the things is that we not only learn from the ill consequences of what happened to people in the past, we also learn of the loss of the worldly things. It's like they didn't maintain their wealth. Their children didn't follow them to the grave. I mean, sometimes people die at similar times, like there's a car wreck or something like that nowadays, or a natural disaster, or a plague, or whatever. Moses and Aaron had particular tools, and they had particular clothing that they wore in their roles, but they weren't people of wealth. And people looked at that, well, you're not all dressed out in gold and all that other stuff. Which throws into question the idea, well, why did the temple priest later wear all that gold and jewels and stuff then. Well, the Bible kind of says that, you know, it wasn't them. They had a group of priests, and they did this as priests. But, you know, that sort of amounts to the same thing. But of course, that is sort of the best way for wealth, is that, you know, but you don't have to have expensive stones and expensive metal and all that other stuff to have your, you know, acts of worship. If God was going to open the treasures of people, as some of the signs, you know, but people have the material world itself. They know what it is. They know about these non-human animals. Every nation has to go through its trials. And is going to be witness to benefits, and whether there's ease or hardship, vanity can arise, and those who don't recite, those who don't practice the ways of the faith, well, then they can be slowly misled amongst that, to the point where they're knowingly and willingly rebelling. It's as the verse, وَقَالُوا نَحْنُ أَكْثَرُ أَمْوَالًا وَأَوْلَادًا وَمَا نَحْنُ بِمُعَذَّبِينَ. I've heard myself, people question my ability to be guided because I'm obviously not rich. And that was done with what happened before. And, you know, not having children doesn't mean that either. I mean, you definitely don't be the sort of person who avoids marriage when you've got a good opportunity for a good spouse and all that stuff. But that stuff being in order doesn't mean you won't be corrected. It is true that sometimes enemies are kept away for a reason. But that ease, again, there's a lesson in that ease. And sometimes people will come and have total control over individuals. And all these stories that we encounter in the scriptures are ones that are there for us to learn from. We're supposed to learn from the narrative. And there are lesser known stories and aspects of things, and we don't know much details. But again, there's sort of a method implied, or something discouraged about what happened regarding some of the people. And different forms of government can be used right. It's like I keep on pointing out that as much as there's ideals about the total system of government, the mixture of the various features, as we might call them nowadays, some of it's constitutional, some of it's democratic, some of it's republic, some of it's socialist, some of it's fascist, some of it's communistic, some of it's libertarian. Some, there's various features that you mix together in a proper government. But, in the secular forms or whatever, the whole reasons of any problems is because of the principles and consciousness of the rulers and the ruled, or at least in the case of most countries, the officiants of the true rulers, the people they really work for, and one of the things that has been set forward for us is God has set a way for us to be united. There's different material circumstances, there's different psychological circumstances, but it's not for us to be divided into various sects. So let us work on what we possess of the actual surrender unto God. Don't just claim the name. Work to be an individual with no need of guilt or shame. Accept the help that has been laid forth in Gabriel, Michael, the light beings, the immigrants, the helpers. Because remember, if somebody needs our help or can benefit from our help, when we give charity or in deed or in substance, we're doing ourselves a favor, to explain some sayings that Prophet Muhammad has stated in that regard. And God's wrath, what's one of the things about God's wrath? Well, wrath, I'm not sure what they're talking about quite so much Arabic, but wrath is like, sort of like saying there's not enough love. It's that sort of anger. And so, it's like a choice that's put upon us in terms of, if God has wrath against somebody, it's because they have chosen that that's what they want. I mean, they don't say wrath, but you know what I mean. They've made some bad decisions deliberately. And one of these ways that people become accursed is they stop encouraging people. They be all live and let live. And, there's certain obligations upon us to say, this isn't right. And there's different ways to do it. Somebody mentions there's some bad things about, their life and their drinking in the past and all that stuff. And you say, well, that's why every known scriptural religion says that, you at least don't become addicted to alcohol, like beverages, or intoxicants, or whatever, however you're going to phrase that. The submission unto God has limits. It has promises. You address the promise breakers, even in war, because treaties are broken. What's that verse in the Quran? I'm trying to think of it. وَمَا تَخَافَنَّ مِنْ قَوْمٍ خِيَانَةً فَانبِذْ إِلَيْهِمْ عَلَى سَوَاءٍ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْخَائِنِينَ. There's a war going on right now that verse pertains to, right? About those who've broken their treaties, those who have aggressed and oppressed, like my country in the UK got this other country to break its agreement of peace saying it would continue to armor. And as far as I know, there's still going to be fighting when this video is released. And if that's the case, over 2 years of war because somebody has bribed somebody to break their treaty. And so when the Muslimin fight a war, it's not the holy war, as people call it. I wouldn't use that translate. Okay, they struggle in the way of God. But, you know, it's not forced conversion. That's one of the 4 things that God curses people for war. One of them is to extend borders so you can't, you know. I keep hearing, oh, well, they speak the same language. It's like, no, that's not a right thing about invading other countries, whatever. But, you know, and then the sermon goes on. It mentions that Ali was honored with the closeness of Muhammad by relationship and with ancestry. But the thing was that he was taken close and trained. That was the thing. It wasn't the closeness of the relationship. It wasn't any of this other stuff. It was that he was trained since Khadijah was alive. And he was one who even heard this weird moan. And this weird moan was Satan realizing what was happening. Whether Satan realized this was the final prophet to humanity, or realized that the need, as it said, for a prophet to come was no longer getting greater, and it was fulfilled. You know what I mean? Is that the true religion, the true social order kind of breaks down. The Bhagavad Gita has a verse about it, 760 or something like that. So we see remnants of this sort of thing pointed out in various other things. It's because God's not going to let the religion completely disappear, but, you know, sometimes it gets pretty close, and there's only a few guided people and that sort of stuff. And of course, people wanted all sorts of miracles. There are 319 miracles related, according to this one text that shows, you know, it lists sources for these miracles. And I haven't gone back and forth and checked, but it sounds fairly right, because I, in my direct reading of Hadith, have seen well over 100 different things narrated. And we need to reason out how Muhammad wasn't just copying other people's claims. Because like when people claim that Muhammad copied the Bible or the Art of Iraq, which was written down later, or something else, there's always something different about Muhammad's account. It's like, yes, things align between one prophet and another. There's similar types of experiences and teachings and stuff. It doesn't mean that they all sit down and copy each other. And the errors in the traditions, those aren't copied, but, you know, it's important for us to go forward and look at some of these things. And saying, okay, 409. I think we did that last time, you know, fearing God. Saying 410. Reminds us not to test God with our speech. We can work in our I'm doing that by this series, is I'm working on my speaking and sharing things, especially not quite memorized, or not at all memorized with pretty much everything I'm talking about here, but and we should also not speak against the means of setting us on the right path. Saying 411 reminds us that our own discipline, as far as being on what's right, that's enough. And we should maintain ourselves as if we are free in ourselves, according to saying 412. And if we're not upholding ourselves, then stifle our expression. Sometimes people keep quiet in ignorance. I kind of get the feeling that they don't, because you always remember people expressing themselves whether they know something or not. But, you know, if you're not going to exhibit patience, don't exhibit anything at all.